Cold CEO rejects his wife. She becomes a medical queen, and now he's desperate for a night of passion. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Before we embark on today's journey, let us take a moment to lift our hearts in a special prayer for our ever-growing storytelling family, a prayer for our beautiful family. Dear loving Creator, with open hearts we gather as one, a tapestry of souls woven together by love and stories. Bless this radiant family, each member a unique and precious bloom in the garden of life. Like roses that offer their fragrance, may we share kindness. Like lilies that stand with grace, may we uplift one another. Like sunflowers that turn toward the light, may we seek wisdom and warmth in every moment. Let our bond be like strong roots, unshaken by the winds of time. May our stories be rivers of joy, flowing into hearts that thirst for love, hope, and belonging. Fill our spirits with light, our words with comfort, and our journey with purpose. May laughter echo in our souls, may compassion guide our steps, and may the love we share blossom endlessly, touching lives beyond what we can see. Amen. Now, my beloved family, let me share with you some beautiful flowers that remind me of each and every one of you. Chrysanthemums, a symbol of honesty and deep friendship, just like the unbreakable bond we share. Daffodils, representing new beginnings and joy, warmly embracing each new family member who joins us. Orchids, a reflection of beauty and resilience, just like the powerful stories we weave together. Forget-me-nots, a reminder of true and unwavering love, mirroring the connection we hold in our hearts. Dahlias, a symbol of kindness and grace, qualities that shine so brightly within our community. My precious family, you are deeply loved and cherished. Let's take attendance. If you are part of our ever-growing family, comment, "I am present." If today marks the beginning of your journey with us, write, "I am new." Since I cannot see your past reactions, I would love to hear if my last stories touched your heart. Your thoughts and feelings are the light that guide me in creating more beautiful moments for us all. Now, let's begin, wrapped in love, bound by stories, and united in spirit. The crystal chandeliers cast diamonds of light across the ballroom of the Lancaster estate. Each prism, a silent witness to the glittering facade of perfection Masego Deja had maintained for the past year. Her fingers traced the stem of her champagne flute, the cool glass a stark contrast to the fire burning in her chest. Around her, New York's elite swirled in an elaborate dance of wealth and influence, unaware that their hostess was counting down the minutes until her world shattered. The heavy silk of her emerald gown whispered against the marble floor as she navigated through clusters of society's most powerful players. Every head turned to watch her passage, not out of respect or admiration, but curiosity. They all knew what she was, the arranged bride, the convenient alliance, the African diamond heiress who had been acquired rather than wooed by their golden boy, Ethan Lancaster. "Darling!" A honeyed voice called out, dripping with false warmth. "You simply must tell everyone about your little project." Victoria Reed sauntered forward, her Valentino dress strategically cut to display every curve, her emerald jewelry a deliberate echo of Masego's gown. The message was clear. Anything Masego had, Victoria could wear better. "The children's cardiac wing isn't a project, Victoria." Masego's voice carried the quiet authority she'd cultivated since childhood. "It's a necessity. Our city has some of the finest medical facilities in the world, yet children with complex cardiac conditions are waiting months for treatment." How passionate. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Though I heard the board wasn't quite convinced by your presentation yesterday. Something about insufficient experience." The barb struck true, but Masego had learned long ago never to let them see you bleed. Medical innovation requires vision, Sometimes those with the most experience are the least willing to embrace change. She turned away, only to feel Victoria's manicured fingers close around her wrist. "Speaking of change," the woman purred, "have you seen your husband lately? He seemed quite energized after yesterday's board meeting." The implied meaning hung in the air like poison. Masego extracted her wrist with deliberate grace. "My husband's energy is his own concern." Making her way to the terrace, Masego sought a moment of peace. The June air was heavy with the scent of roses. Roses she had planted herself in those first hopeful weeks of marriage when she still believed love could grow in barren soil. A memory surfaced, Ethan finding her in the garden, dirt smudged on her cheeks, roses scattered around her. His lips had twitched, almost a smile. For a moment she'd thought, but no. He had simply turned away, leaving her among the thorns she'd foolishly thought could make a home beautiful. Quite the gathering. His voice, now deep and cultured, sent shivers down her spine. "Though I don't recall authorizing the announcement about the cardiac wing." Masego turned slowly, facing the man who had been her husband in name only for the past year. Ethan Lancaster commanded attention without effort. 6 feet 2 inches of old money and new power, wrapped in a suit that cost more than most people's cars. His steel-grey eyes assessed her with the same clinical interest he brought to hostile takeovers. "The announcement was already scheduled," she replied evenly. "The board needs to see public support for the project." "The board," he stepped closer, his cologne teasing her senses, "needs to see results, not promises. Your father's connections may have bought you a seat at the table, but this isn't some charity project you can fund with Daddy's diamonds." The casual cruelty of his words made her fingers tighten around her glass. "No, of course not. It's far more important to fund your latest acquisition. Tell me, does Victoria know she's just another hostile takeover?" Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Careful, Mrs. Lancaster. You're forgetting your place." "My place?" A bitter laugh escaped her. "How could I forget? You've reminded me every day for the past year, the convenient bride, the perfect hostess, the silent partner in your perfect life." She set down her glass with precise control. "Well, you won't have to remind me anymore." He caught her meaning instantly, his posture shifting from dismissive to predatory. "So, you found out about the divorce papers? Or about your plans to announce our separation at tonight's gala?" She met his gaze steadily. "Did you think I wouldn't notice the whispers, the rumors, the way Victoria's been practically measuring the master bedroom for new curtains?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "You knew this was a business arrangement from the start." "No." Masego's voice was soft but steel-edged. "I knew this was an arranged marriage. I didn't know it came with a 1-year expiration date." He moved closer, crowding her space, using his height to intimidate. "Don't pretend this isn't what you wanted. Freedom from the cold, cruel husband who never loved you. Isn't that the story you'll tell?" "I never wanted freedom from you, Ethan." The truth spilled from her lips before she could stop it. "I wanted freedom with you." For a moment, just a moment, something raw and real flashed across his face. Then the mask slammed back into place. "Well, now you'll have all the freedom you desire." He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "Your lawyer has already reviewed everything. All that's needed is your signature." Masego took the envelope, her fingers steady despite the trembling in her heart. "Here? Now? Why wait?" His smile was razor-sharp. "Unless you'd prefer I make the announcement first." The music from the ballroom swelled, a waltz they had danced to at their wedding. Masego uncapped the pen he offered, remembering how he had held her that night, not with love, but with precise practice steps that never faltered. "You know what your problem is, Ethan." She signed her name with fluid grace. You're so afraid of feeling anything real that you've convinced yourself nothing is real at all. She pressed the papers into his chest, forcing him to catch them. Congratulations. You're free of the burden of having a wife who actually loved you. The words landed like slaps across his face. Before he could respond, she turned and walked back into the ballroom, head high, stride confident. Only she knew that each step felt like walking on broken glass. Behind her, Ethan stood frozen, the divorce papers clutched in his hand, watching the only woman who had ever seen past his walls walk away. And for the first time in his carefully controlled life, he felt something crack inside his chest. A hairline fracture in the armor he'd spent a lifetime building. But it was too late. The papers were signed, the die was cast, and Masego Deja, soon to be stripped of the Lancaster name, was already gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of roses and the ghost of what might have been. Chapter 2. Shattered Dreams. Dawn crept through the Lancaster mansion's windows, painting shadows across Masego's face as she stood in what had been her bedroom for the past year. The room still held traces of her presence, a forgotten earring on the vanity, the faint scent of jasmine lingering in the air, a dog-eared medical journal by the bed she had never shared with her husband. Her fingers trembled as she packed away her life into leather cases, each item a memory she couldn't bear to examine too closely. The emerald gown from last night lay discarded across a chaise lounge, its silk folds reflecting the morning light like tears. "Let me help you with that, dear." Masego turned to find Grace Lancaster in the doorway, elegant as always in her mourning attire. Ethan's mother moved into the room with the quiet grace that had made her a legend in New York society. But today, there was something different in her eyes, a softness that made Masego's throat tight. "You don't have to, Grace. I'm sure you have better things to do than help pack away your former daughter-in-law's belongings." "Former?" Grace's eyebrow arched delicately. "The papers may be signed, but some bonds aren't so easily broken." She moved to the closet, running her fingers along the row of designer dresses. "You know, I warned him this would happen." Masego paused in folding a cashmere sweater. "Warned who?" "Ethan, of course, the night before your wedding." Grace pulled out a midnight blue evening gown, holding it up to the light. "I told him if he treated love like a business transaction, he'd end up losing the most valuable asset of all." A bitter smile touched Masego's lips. "I was never an asset to him, Grace. I was a liability, the African diamond heiress who dared to have dreams beyond being a society wife." "No, my dear." Grace laid the dress carefully in a garment bag. "You were the only person who ever saw him as more than the Lancaster heir, and that terrified him." Moving to the vanity, Grace opened a small jewelry box, removing a delicate gold chain with a single pearl pendant. "This was mine, you know, given to me by my mother-in-law when I married into the Lancaster family. She told me it had been passed down through generations of Lancaster women, each one adding their own story to its legacy." "Grace, I couldn't possibly." "You can, and you will." Grace fastened the necklace around Masego's throat, her fingers lingering for a moment. "Because whatever my son's foolish pride has cost him, you are still the daughter of my heart." Tears threatened to spill, but Masego held them back. "Thank you for everything, for trying to make me feel welcome, for supporting the Children's Wing project." "About that project." Grace moved to her handbag, withdrawing an envelope. "The board may have been hesitant yesterday, but they haven't met the full force of Grace Lancaster's persuasion. Inside you'll find a letter of recommendation and—" She paused, a mysterious smile playing at her lips. "Well, let's just say sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as losses." Before Masego could respond, a commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Victoria Reed's voice carried through the door, sharp with command. as she directed the household staff about changes to be made immediately. Grace's expression hardened. That woman has all the subtlety of a sledgehammer and half the utility. She squared her shoulders. I'll deal with our unwelcome guest. You finish packing, and Masego. She turned at the door. Remember, a Lancaster woman knows when to retreat, but she never surrenders. Left alone, Masego opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside, she found not only Grace's letter, but an acceptance to the prestigious Swiss Institute of Cardiac Innovation, the very fellowship she had dreamed of but never dared to pursue. A note in Grace's elegant handwriting read, "Sometimes the end of one dream is the beginning of another. Your talent deserves a stage worthy of its brilliance. Show them what a diamond looks like when pressure turns it perfect." Masego sank onto the window seat, the morning sun warming her face as tears finally fell freely. In her hands, the acceptance letter promised everything she had ever wanted: recognition, respect, the chance to prove herself beyond the shadow of the Lancaster name. The sound of Ethan's voice drifted up from the garden below. He was on the phone, his tone clipped and professional as he discussed damage control with his PR team. Just yesterday, that voice had the power to shatter her world. Now it seemed distant, like a storm moving away across the horizon. Rising, Masego moved with newfound purpose. She carefully packed away the last of her medical books, each one a step on the path she had never abandoned, despite the weight of expectations that had threatened to crush her dreams. The pearl at her throat caught the light, warm against her skin like a promise. Grace was right. She was still a Lancaster woman, if only in spirit, and Lancaster women rose from the ashes of their mistakes stronger than before. A soft knock at the door revealed Agnes, the housekeeper who had been more friend than servant over the past year. "The car is ready, Mrs. Lan. Ms. Deja." The correction was gentle, accompanied by a warm smile. "And this arrived for you this morning." She handed Masego a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside lay a single red rose and a card that read, "To new beginnings. With love, your patients at Memorial Children's Ward." The simplicity of the gesture, children she had fought to help even as her personal life crumbled, broke something loose inside her chest. These were the dreams worth fighting for. These were the battles worth winning. With steady hands, Masego closed the last suitcase. Her wedding ring, a flawless diamond that had never quite felt like it belonged on her finger, she left on the dresser. Beside it, she placed a note. "Ethan, you once told me that love was a weakness successful people couldn't afford. I hope someday you realize that the ability to love is the only strength that matters." The mansion's grand staircase had never seemed so long as it did now, each step carrying her further from the life she had tried to build here. In the foyer, she could hear Victoria already redecorating in her mind, speaking to the staff about changes to be made. But it was Grace who appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her presence commanding enough to silence Victoria mid-sentence. "Allow me to walk you out, my dear." Together, they moved through the morning-lit halls of the Lancaster mansion. Grace's arm was warm through the silk of her blouse as she guided Masego past, watching eyes and whispered conversations. At the car, Grace pressed a final kiss to her cheek. "Write to me from Switzerland. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is walk away from what we thought we wanted, toward what we truly deserve." Masego's voice was steady as she replied, "Thank you for showing me what real grace looks like." The car door closed with a soft click, sealing her into the quiet leather interior. As the driver pulled away from the mansion, Masego didn't look back at the life she was leaving behind. Instead, her fingers traced the acceptance letter in her purse, its promises more solid than any wedding vow had ever been. She was Masego Deja again, doctor, dreamer, daughter of a diamond empire. And somewhere between the shattered pieces of her marriage lay the seeds of something stronger than love or pride. The future stretched before her like an unwritten page, and for the first time since she had walked down the aisle toward Ethan Lancaster, she felt truly, gloriously free. Chapter 3. The Making of a Queen. The Swiss Alps pierced the morning sky like crystal daggers, their snow-capped peaks catching the first rays of dawn. In her private suite at the Swiss Institute of Cardiac Innovation, Masego Deja stood before floor-to-ceiling windows, watching sunrise paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold. 3 years had passed since she'd left New York, each day a careful step away from the woman she'd been. Her reflection in the glass showed a stranger, gone were the soft curls and demure dresses that had marked her as Ethan Lancaster's perfect society wife. Now her hair fell in sleek obsidian waves past her shoulders, and her white medical coat covered a silk blouse that cost more than most surgeons made in a month. Every inch of her radiated power, from her stiletto heels to the subtle diamonds that adorned her ears. "Dr. Deja." Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "The team is ready for morning rounds." Masego smiled, remembering her first day at the Institute. She'd arrived with nothing but Grace's letter of recommendation and a determination to prove herself. Now, 3 years later, she led the most innovative cardiac research team in Europe. The hospital corridors gleamed as she made her way to the intensive care unit, her heels clicking against imported marble floors. This was no ordinary hospital. The Swiss Institute catered to royalty, billionaires, and anyone wealthy enough to afford miracle cures. Yet Masego had insisted that 20% of their beds be reserved for cases that needed their expertise, regardless of ability to pay. "Good morning, Dr. Deja." The head nurse, Adrienne, fell into step beside her. "The Crown Prince's numbers are stable this morning. His father asked specifically to speak with you." "Schedule him for 10. Masego accepted the tablet Adrienne offered, scanning the morning's reports. "And the girl from Kenya?" "Responding beautifully to your new procedure. Her father sent another thank you note and a rather impressive donation to the Children's Research Fund." They reached the conference room where her team waited. Through the glass walls, Masego could see them, the brightest minds in cardiac surgery, all hand-picked by her over the past 3 years. As she entered, their conversations hushed. "Good morning." Masego's voice carried easily through the room. "Dr. Chen, let's start with the Crown Prince." The morning rounds proceeded with military precision. Each case was presented, discussed, and planned with the excellence that had become her trademark. Under her leadership, the Institute had pioneered 3 groundbreaking surgical techniques and saved countless lives deemed unsavable by other facilities. It was after the last case that Adrienne appeared again, this time with a peculiar expression. "Dr. Deja, there's a call from New York." Masego's hand stilled on her tablet. "Grace, number Manhattan Memorial Hospital. Their board chairman." The silence in the room grew heavy. Everyone knew the story, or thought they did. How the brilliant Dr. Deja had risen from the ashes of a failed society marriage to become the queen of cardiac surgery. Gossip magazines still occasionally ran stories about her transformation, comparing photos of the shy doctor she'd been to the powerhouse she'd become. "I'll take it in my office." Masego's voice betrayed nothing as she gathered her files. "Dr. Chen, you'll lead afternoon rounds." The walk to her office felt longer than usual. Manhattan Memorial, the hospital where she'd once begged for funding for a children's wing. The hospital where Ethan had humiliated her in front of the board. The hospital that had dismissed her as nothing more than a wealthy man's decorative wife. Her office, like everything else in her life now, was a statement of power. African art worth millions adorned the walls, and her desk was carved from a single piece of rare mahogany. She settled into her chair, took a moment to center herself, then accepted the call. "Doctor," Deja speaking. "Doctor." The chairman's voice carried none of the condescension she remembered. "Thank you for taking my call. I'll be direct. We need you in New York." A cold smile curved her lips. "I'm quite satisfied with my position here, Chairman. We're prepared to offer you complete autonomy. Your own research facility, unlimited funding for the Children's Cardiac Unit, the same unit you refused to fund 3 years ago." Masego's voice was silk over steel. "How interesting that your perspective has changed." There was a pause. "We've followed your work, Doctor. Your innovations in pediatric cardiac surgery are revolutionary. The techniques you've developed, the success rates you've achieved, they're unprecedented. And now you want those success rates associated with Manhattan Memorial." She leaned back in her chair, enjoying the moment. "Tell me, is Victoria Reed still on your board?" Another pause, longer this time. "Mrs. Lancaster resigned her position last year." The name hit like a physical blow. Not Victoria Reed, Mrs. Lancaster. So Ethan had married her after all. Masego was grateful for years of practice at masking her emotions. "I see. Well, Chairman, while I appreciate the offer, I must decline. The Institute requires my full attention." She let the silence stretch uncomfortably. "However, I do know several excellent surgeons who might be interested. I'll have my assistant send their information." "Doctor, please, at least consider—" "Good day, Chairman." She ended the call with a decisive tap. For several minutes, Masego sat motionless, watching snow fall outside her window. The news about Ethan's marriage shouldn't affect her. She'd built an empire of her own, far grander than anything the Lancaster name could have given her, yet something deep inside ached, like a badly healed wound suddenly exposed to cold air. A knock at her door provided welcome interruption. "Come in." Adrian entered with a stack of journals. "Your latest research paper made the cover of 4 major medical publications." She laid them on the desk. "And the Crown Prince's father is here for his meeting." Masego rose, smoothing her silk blouse. "Thank you, Adrienne. Oh, and please call Dr. Chen. Tell him I'd like to review the Prince's latest scans before our consultation." The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, surgeries, and research reviews. It wasn't until evening that Masego allowed herself to truly process the morning's call. Standing at her office window, watching lights twinkle in the valley below, she realized something fundamental had shifted. Manhattan Memorial's offer wasn't just a job opportunity, it was validation. They wanted her not as Ethan Lancaster's ex-wife, but as Dr. Masego Deja, the surgeon who had revolutionized cardiac care. The woman who had taken her broken dreams and forged them into a crown of achievements no one could deny. Her phone chimed with a message from Grace. "Heard Manhattan Memorial tried to poach you. Their loss is Switzerland's gain. Dinner next time I'm in Geneva. Love always, G." A warm smile touched Masego's lips. Through all these years, Grace had remained her strongest supporter, visiting regularly and never mentioning Ethan unless Masego asked, which she never did. Another message followed quickly. "P.S. That paper on minimally invasive valve replacement. Brilliant. You've become exactly who you were always meant to be." Masego touched the pearl pendant she still wore, Grace's gift from that last morning in New York. Yes, she had become who she was meant to be. Not a Lancaster bride, but a queen in her own right. The snow fell harder outside, but Masego barely noticed. Her mind was already turning to tomorrow's challenges, a groundbreaking surgery she'd developed, a paper she was writing, a lecture series she'd been invited to lead. She had built this life brick by brick, triumph by triumph, and no ghost of past heartbreak could shake its foundation. As night settled over the Alps, Masego Deja, the woman who had turned rejection into an empire, began planning her next conquest. Let Manhattan Memorial want her. Let them regret their past dismissal. She had bigger dreams to chase, higher mountains to climb. And somewhere in New York, in the hospital boardroom where she had once stood begging for funding, her name was spoken with reverence and awe, not as Ethan Lancaster's ex-wife, but as the queen of cardiac surgery who had risen from the ashes of their disdain to rule a kingdom they could never have imagined. The making of a queen was complete, and her reign was only beginning. Chapter 4. Return to Power. The Manhattan skyline stretched before Masego like a wall of memories as her private jet descended toward JFK. 5 years had carved new towers into the horizon, but some things remained unchanged. The Empire State Building still pierced the clouds like an accusation, and somewhere in that concrete maze, Ethan Lancaster still ruled his empire. Dr. Deja? Her personal assistant Sophie appeared at her elbow. The International Cardiac Surgery Conference organizers called again. They're insisting you give the keynote address. Masego's lips curved into a smile that would have been foreign to her younger self. Tell them I'll consider it. She turned from the window, her Hermes silk dress whispering against leather seats. What's our schedule for today? The Four Seasons has prepared the presidential suite. You have 2 hours to freshen up before your meeting with the European Medical Association Board, then dinner with Grace Lancaster, Masego finished softly. 5 years of distance hadn't weakened their bond. If anything, Grace's support had grown stronger with each of Masego's accomplishments. The plane touched down with barely a tremor. Through the window, Masego could see the sleek black Maybach waiting on the tarmac. Everything in her life now spoke of power, from her hand-tailored wardrobe to her team of personal staff. She had rebuilt herself into someone unrecognizable from the shy doctor who had once begged for funding in borrowed designer dresses. The drive into Manhattan felt like sliding back through time. They passed the hospital where she had once worked, its facade unchanged, though its reputation had suffered in recent years. Her innovative surgical techniques had made headlines worldwide, and every major medical center that had rejected her now desperately sought her approval. At the Four Seasons, the staff treated her with the deference reserved for royalty. The presidential suite offered a commanding view of Central Park, so different from the garden she had once tended at the Lancaster estate. Your dress for the medical conference has arrived, Sophie announced, wheeling in a garment bag. Valentino sent 3 options for tonight's dinner. Masego waved a dismissive hand. The black one. Grace always said I looked best in black. As her team bustled around her, preparing documents and confirming appointments, Masego allowed herself a moment of reflection. 5 years ago she had fled New York with nothing but Grace's letter and a broken heart. Now she returned as one of the most powerful figures in international medicine. The European Medical Association meeting proved predictably dull. Old men in expensive suits debating policies they barely understood. Masego sat at the head of the table, her mere presence a reminder of how much the medical world had changed. Her innovative cardiac technique had saved hundreds of lives and earned her nominations for every major medical award. It was after the meeting, in the elegant bar of the Four Seasons, that fate dealt its first card. Dr. Deja. The voice came from behind her, rich with authority and barely concealed interest. Your reputation precedes you. She turned to find Dr. James Morrison, head of cardiology at Manhattan Memorial, watching her with undisguised admiration. Dr. Morrison. How unexpected. I followed your work closely. He settled onto the bar stool beside her, signaling the bartender. Your paper on minimally invasive valve replacement was revolutionary. Funny. Masego sipped her wine. I remember proposing similar techniques to your department 5 years ago. You called them unrealistic and overly ambitious. Morrison had the grace to look uncomfortable. Times change. People change. He cleared his throat. Speaking of change, we're hosting a major cardiac surgery conference next week. We'd be honored if you'd consider attending. I'm quite busy. She set down her glass with deliberate precision. Though I hear congratulations are in order, your new cardiac wing is quite impressive. Yes, well, he shifted uncomfortably. The Lancaster Foundation's donation made it possible. The name hung in the air between them. Masego kept her expression perfectly neutral, though her heart picked up speed. How interesting. And how is Mrs. Lancaster? I heard Victoria took quite an interest in hospital administration. Morrison's face registered surprise. Victoria? Oh, you haven't heard. He leaned forward conspiratorially. The wedding never happened, called off 2 days before, caused quite the scandal. The news hit Masego like a physical blow, but years of practice kept her features composed. How unfortunate. If you'll excuse me, I have a dinner engagement. She stood, gathering her Hermes bag with steady hands. 5 years of carefully constructed indifference threatened to crack. Ethan hadn't married Victoria. The information shifted something deep inside her, a tectonic plate of emotion she'd thought long settled. The elevator ride to her suite gave her time to rebuild her walls. It didn't matter that Ethan had remained single. She had built an empire of her own, one that had nothing to do with the Lancaster name or fortune. Dr. Deja? Sophie met her at the door. Mrs. Lancaster called. She's running slightly late for dinner, but asked if you'd meet her at Le Bernardin instead of Daniel. Fine. Masego moved to the bedroom to change. The black Valentino, please. The dress was a masterpiece of understated sensuality, black silk that clung to every curve she'd earned through years of rigorous exercise, with a neckline that suggested power rather than seduction. At her throat, Grace's pearl caught the light. Le Bernardin's private dining room offered discreet luxury and absolute privacy. Grace Lancaster rose to embrace her, elegant as ever in Chanel. Darling, Grace's perfume enveloped her. You look magnificent. As do you. Masego returned the embrace warmly. Though I thought we agreed on Daniel. A familiar smile played at Grace's lips. Change of plans. I hope you don't mind. Before Masego could respond, the door opened again. Her heart stopped. Ethan Lancaster stood in the doorway, 5 years older but somehow more devastating than memory had allowed. His custom suit couldn't hide the subtle changes, new lines around his eyes, a slight silver threading his temples. He looked like a man who had lost something precious and never quite recovered. Their eyes met across the room. 5 years of carefully maintained distance crumbled in an instant. Masego. His voice was rough, as if her name hurt to say. She lifted her chin, summoning every ounce of power she'd built. Mr. Lancaster. How unexpected. Grace cleared her throat delicately. Well, would you look at the time? I'm afraid I double-booked myself. You two catch up. Dinner's already ordered. With a grace that belied her years, she slipped past her son and out the door. The silence stretched between them, 5 years of unspoken words filling the space like smoke. You look... Ethan's eyes traveled over her, taking in every detail of her transformation. Successful? Masego supplied coolly. Accomplished, or just different from the woman you so eagerly divorced? He flinched at her tone. I was going to say beautiful, but yes, successful too. He moved further into the room. I've followed your career. How flattering. She reached for her wine glass. Though I imagine it was hard to miss. My face has been on rather a lot of medical journals lately. And society magazines? He settled into the chair across from her. The Swiss Institute's miracle worker, the queen of cardiac surgery. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. They don't know the half of it. No, she agreed softly. They don't know how the great Ethan Lancaster's ex-wife had to flee to Switzerland to become who she was meant to be. Pain flashed across his face. Masego, don't. She held up a hand. We're not doing this. Whatever game Grace is playing, I'm not interested in a reconciliation tour. It's not a game. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. Manhattan Memorial is hosting a cardiac surgery conference next week. Every major hospital in the country will be there. I'm aware. Dr. Morrison already extended an invitation. Accept it. The words came out like a command. Then he softened his tone. Please, what you're doing, the lives you're saving, it's extraordinary. The medical community here needs to hear from you directly. Masego studied him over the rim of her wineglass. Why do you care? Because I was wrong. The admission seemed to cost him. About everything. Your vision for the children's wing, your surgical innovations. You saw possibilities I was too blind to recognize. The waiter arrived with their first course, providing a welcome interruption. Masego used the moment to gather her thoughts, Ethan Lancaster admitting he was wrong. The world truly had changed. The conference is next week? She kept her tone professional. Yes, full schedule of presentations plus a charity gala to raise funds for a children's cardiac wing. The irony tasted bitter on her tongue. How fitting. Masego. He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand. Give New York another chance. Give ... He hesitated. Give us another chance. She pulled her hand back sharply. There is no us, Mr. Lancaster. There never really was. Standing, she gathered her clutch. I'll consider the conference. Have them send the details to my office. You're leaving. He stood as well, his height still imposing even after all these years. We haven't even had dinner. I've lost my appetite. She moved toward the door, then paused. You know what's funny? 5 years ago, I would have given anything to hear you say you were wrong. Now, she turned to face him fully. Now it doesn't matter at all. But as she walked away, heels clicking against the restaurant's marble floors, Masego knew she had just told her first lie since returning to New York, because the way her heart raced, the way her skin tingled where he had almost touched her, it mattered. It mattered far too much. Chapter 5. Professional Warfare. The Manhattan Memorial Conference Room hummed with anticipation. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the gathering of medical pioneers and hospital administrators who had come to witness what promised to be either a triumph or a disaster. Masego Deja sat at the head of the table, elegant in a custom Chanel suit the color of midnight. To her right, Dr. Morrison fidgeted with his tie. To her left, the hospital's board members watched her with a mixture of hope and trepidation. At the far end of the table, Ethan Lancaster's presence was like a gravitational force, bending everything in the room toward him. As you can see, Morrison was saying, the proposed partnership would give Manhattan Memorial exclusive rights to your surgical techniques. Our facilities would become the premier training center for no. Masego's voice cut through his presentation like a scalpel. Morrison blinked. I'm sorry? The techniques aren't for sale. She closed the proposal folder with deliberate grace. They're meant to save lives, not boost profit margins. Dr. Deja, one of the board members leaned forward, surely we can reach some arrangement. The Lancaster Group is prepared to offer... The Lancaster Group? Masego's laugh held no humor. How interesting that you're negotiating on their behalf. Tell me, when did a private investment firm gain such influence over medical policy? Ethan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. She could feel his eyes on her, studying every micro-expression, every carefully controlled gesture. Perhaps, Morrison tried again, we could discuss a limited partnership. Your Swiss Institute could maintain primary control while... Dr. Morrison, Masego stood, her height enhanced by Christian Louboutin heels that cost more than his monthly salary. 5 years ago, I sat in this very room and begged you to consider innovative cardiac procedures for children who couldn't afford private care. You dismissed me as an amateur with unrealistic dreams. Her smile was razor-sharp. Now those same procedures have revolutionized cardiac surgery worldwide. The difference is, I no longer need your approval. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Ethan seemed caught in the power of her presence, something like pride mingling with the frustration in his eyes. However, she adjusted the pearl pendant at her throat, a reminder of Grace's faith in her. I am willing to establish a training program. 3 of my top surgeons will rotate through Manhattan Memorial, teaching your staff the basic principles of the techniques. In exchange, 30% of all cardiac procedures using these methods must be provided at reduced or no cost to patients who can't afford them. Morrison's relief was palpable. That's very generous. I'm not finished. Masego's voice could have frozen flame. The children's cardiac wing will operate independently with its own board of directors, and I will personally oversee the selection of cases. One of the board members sputtered. That's unprecedented. The liability alone is covered by my institute's insurance. She gathered her Hermes bag. Those are my terms, gentlemen. Take them, or watch your cardiac department become obsolete while Mercy hospitals with more vision surpass you. She turned to leave, but Ethan's voice stopped her. The Lancaster Group accepts your terms. All eyes swung to him. In 5 years, he hadn't changed his commanding presence, though new lines marked the corners of his eyes. Success had aged him well, but there was something else, a weariness that hadn't been there before. In fact, he continued, rising from his chair, we'll double the proposed budget for the children's wing, with one condition. Masego arched an eyebrow. You're in no position to make conditions, Mr. Lancaster. You'll be the head of the board. His eyes held hers, intense and unreadable. The children's wing needs someone with both medical expertise and a genuine commitment to helping those in need. Someone who won't be swayed by political pressure or profit margins. The offer hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. 5 years ago, she had dreamed of running just such a program. Now he was offering it to her, wrapped in a power play she couldn't quite decipher. How generous of you, she said coolly, to offer me what I wanted when it no longer holds any appeal. But they both knew it was a lie. The chance to help children who couldn't afford premium care, it was everything she'd fought for, everything she still believed in. Think about it, Ethan said softly. The offer stands. She swept from the room without acknowledging him, her heart thundering against her ribs. In the elevator, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, to push back against the memories threatening to overwhelm her. Her phone buzzed. Grace. Dinner tonight? I hear the meeting was interesting. Masego smiled despite herself. Of course, Grace already knew. Le Cirque at 8, and no surprise guests this time. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and conference calls with her team in Switzerland. By evening, she had almost convinced herself she was immune to Ethan's presence in her life again. Le Cirque's private dining room offered a sanctuary of soft lighting and discreet service. Grace was already waiting, elegant in emerald silk that brought out the green in her eyes. You look exhausted, darling. Grace kissed her cheek. Board meetings will do that. Don't play innocent. Masego settled into her chair. You knew about Ethan's offer. I may have heard something. Grace sipped her wine. The children's wing was your dream once. Once, Masego signaled for her own wine. Before your son made it clear that dreams were a liability in his world. People change. Grace's voice was gentle. Sometimes they even grow up. Grace. Masego leaned forward. Why are you really here? The older woman set down her glass. Because I watched you build an empire from the ashes of heartbreak. Because you've become the woman I always knew you could be, and because my son, for all his money and power, has been sleepwalking through life since you left. That's not my problem. No, Grace agreed. But this children's wing, the chance to save lives that would otherwise be lost, that's exactly the kind of problem you've spent 5 years solving. Before Masego could respond, her phone buzzed. A message from Sophie. Emergency at Manhattan Memorial. They need a consult on a complex case. Go. Grace waved her away. Save a life. We'll catch up tomorrow. The hospital was eerily quiet at this hour. Masego's heels echoed through empty corridors as she made her way to the cardiac unit. She found Dr. Morrison waiting with a thick file and an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry to disturb your evening," he began, "but we have a situation." The case was complex, a 6-year-old with a congenital defect that most surgeons would deem inoperable, the type of case that had driven her to develop her innovative techniques in the first place. "She needs immediate surgery," Morrison explained, "but our team isn't trained in your methods yet." When did she present? This afternoon. Her parents brought her in after she collapsed at school. They have no insurance, no resources. Masego studied the scans, already seeing the procedure in her mind. "Book an OR for tomorrow morning. I'll do it myself. But the paperwork, the agreements we discussed, can wait." She handed back the file. "Some things are more important than contracts and conditions." A slow clap from the doorway made them both turn. Ethan stood there, his tie loosened, jacket gone. He looked like he'd been running his hands through his hair. "Exactly what I would expect from you," he said softly. "Saving lives first, worrying about details later." Morrison excused himself, leaving them alone in the quiet hospital corridor. Masego felt suddenly, acutely aware of how long it had been since they'd been truly alone together. "Why are you here, Ethan?" He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, still the same after all these years. "Because I knew you'd come. Because you've never been able to walk away from someone who needs your help." His voice dropped lower. "Because I needed to see you in your element doing what you were born to do." "Stop." She held up a hand. "Whatever game you're playing, no games." He caught her hand, his thumb brushing her palm. "Just truth." Finally. The touch sent electricity up her arm. "I was wrong to try to dim your light, wrong to let my pride stand in the way of your dreams, wrong to let you go." Masego pulled her hand away, but her skin tingled where he had touched her. "It's too late for apologies." "Is it?" His eyes searched hers. "You're still wearing my mother's pearl. Still fighting for the dreams you had when we were married. Still letting the past influence your decisions." "I'm wearing this pearl because Grace believed in me when no one else did." Her voice shook slightly. "And I'm fighting for those dreams because they were always mine. Not yours, not the Lancaster names. Mine. I know." He stepped back, giving her space to breathe. "That's why I want you to run the children's wing. Not because you're my ex-wife, but because you're the only one I trust to do it right." The weight of the moment pressed against her chest. 5 years of building walls, of proving herself, of becoming untouchable, and here he was, offering her everything she'd once wanted, wrapped in professional respect rather than personal redemption. "I'll think about it," she said finally, "but not because of you, because somewhere in this city there's a little girl who needs surgery that only I can provide. I understand." He turned to go, then paused. "For what it's worth, watching you become this version of yourself, it's been extraordinary, even from a distance." She waited until his footsteps faded before allowing herself to lean against the wall, eyes closed. Tomorrow, she would save a child's life. Tomorrow, She would begin training a new generation of surgeons in her techniques. Tomorrow, she would be Dr. Masego Deja, Queen of Cardiac Surgery. But tonight, in the quiet of an empty hospital corridor, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what might have been and the dangerous possibility of what might still be. Chapter 6. Unexpected Crisis. The annual Lancaster Foundation Charity Ball transformed the Metropolitan Museum of Art into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast honeyed light across marble floors, while New York's elite navigated the grand space with practiced grace. At the center of it all stood Grace Lancaster, resplendent in vintage Dior, holding court as she had for 3 decades. Masego watched from the mezzanine, nursing a glass of champagne. She hadn't planned to attend, but Grace's personal request had been impossible to refuse. "For old time's sake," she'd said, though they both knew it was more than that. "Quite the spectacle, isn't it?" A familiar voice drew her attention. Victoria Reed, in red Valentino that screamed for attention, sidled up beside her. "Though I suppose you're used to grander events now, Switzerland must be lovely this time of year." "It is." Masego didn't bother to turn. "I'm surprised to see you here, Victoria. I thought the Lancaster Foundation had revised their guest list." "Oh, darling." Victoria's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Did you think you were the only one who could reinvent herself? My pharmaceutical company just signed a major contract with Manhattan Memorial. I'm practically required to attend these tedious affairs now." Before Masego could respond, a commotion erupted below. Grace Lancaster, eternally poised Grace, swayed on her feet. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering on marble in perfect synchronization with her collapse. Masego was moving before conscious thought took over. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her emerald gown floating behind her like smoke. The crowd parted automatically, recognition and respect creating a path to where Grace lay. "Give her space!" Masego's command cut through the panicked murmurs. She knelt beside Grace, fingers finding her pulse with professional precision. "Someone call an ambulance." "Already done." Ethan appeared at her side, his face tight with concern. "Mother, can you hear me?" Grace's eyes fluttered open, focusing first on Masego, then her son. "Well," she managed a weak smile, "this is rather embarrassing." "Save your strength." Masego's mind was already cataloguing symptoms, running through possibilities. "How long have you had the chest pain?" Grace's surprise was answer enough. "How did you—" "The way you're holding your left arm, the slight blue tinge to your lips." Masego glanced at Ethan. "She needs to go to Manhattan Memorial immediately. Their cardiac unit is being trained in your techniques." He nodded, understanding immediately. "I'll have them prepare—" "No!" Grace's voice was stronger now, though her grip on Masego's hand remained weak. "The Swiss Institute. If something's wrong with my heart, I want the best." The ambulance arrived with impressive speed. Being a Lancaster, still carried weight in New York. As paramedics transferred Grace onto a stretcher, Masego gave rapid-fire instructions, using medical terminology that made the social elite around them remember she was more than just Ethan's glamorous ex-wife. "I'm riding with her," Masego announced as they wheeled Grace toward the exit. "We both are." Ethan's tone left no room for argument. He'd already shed his tuxedo jacket, his bow tie hanging loose around his neck. The ambulance ride was tense with unspoken fears. Grace drifted in and out of consciousness while Masego monitored her vitals and coordinated with Manhattan Memorial's cardiac team via phone. "Dr. Morrison," she spoke into her phone, voice clipped and professional, "I need you to send me her complete medical history, yes, everything, and get Dr. Chen from my institute on video conference. We may need to transfer her to Switzerland." Ethan watched her work with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Gone was any trace of their personal history. This was Dr. Masego Deja, world-renowned cardiac surgeon, fighting to save the woman who had been more mother to her than ex-mother-in-law. At Manhattan Memorial, they wheeled Grace directly to the cardiac unit. Masego had already changed into scrubs, her evening gown replaced by hospital-issue blues that somehow looked as elegant on her as designer silk. Initial tests show significant arterial blockage, Dr. Morrison reported, handing her a tablet with Grace's results. But there's something else. The echo shows an anomaly in the left ventricle. Masego's fingers flew over the screen, enlarging the image. I've seen this before, in Switzerland. It's rare but treatable if caught early. She looked up at Morrison. Book an OR. I need to do this myself. Now? Morrison glanced at his watch. It's nearly midnight. Would you prefer to wait until it's too late? Her voice could have frozen flame. Book the OR and get my surgical team on the next flight from Geneva? Ethan, who had been quietly watching from the corner, stepped forward. Already done. Your team will be here in 8 hours. Masego met his eyes, surprised by his initiative. Thank you. She's my mother. His voice was rough with emotion. And you're the only one I trust to save her. The weight of those words hung between them as Masego turned back to Grace's test results. The next hours passed in a blur of preparation, consulting with her team via video, reviewing Grace's medical history, planning a surgery that would combine her innovative techniques with traditional approaches. Dawn was breaking when Dr. Chen and the rest of her surgical team arrived from Switzerland, looking remarkably fresh despite the overnight flight. Dr. Deja. Chen greeted her with professional warmth. We came as soon as we could. The new equipment, being installed now. She led them toward the conference room where she'd set up temporary headquarters. We'll need to modify the procedure slightly to account for her age and the unusual presentation of... A nurse interrupted with fresh test results. Masego's face tightened as she reviewed them. What is it? Ethan asked from the doorway. He looked exhausted, his usual polish stripped away by hours of worry. Her numbers are dropping faster than we anticipated. Masego turned to her team. We need to move now. Dr. Chen, scrub in. The rest of you, review the modified procedure. We start in 20 minutes. Ethan caught her arm as she passed. Masego. His voice cracked slightly. Please. She covered his hand with hers, allowing herself this moment of connection. I won't let anything happen to her. I promise. The touch lingered between them, 5 years of distance dissolving in the face of shared fear for the woman they both loved. Then Masego pulled away, transforming back into the surgeon who had revolutionized cardiac care. Mr. Lancaster, her voice was gentle but firm, get some rest. This will take several hours. I'll wait. He managed a ghost of his usual commanding smile. I'm good at that now. The double meaning wasn't lost on her, but there was no time to dwell on it. Grace needed her full attention, her complete focus. Personal complications would have to wait. As she scrubbed in for surgery, Masego caught her reflection in the mirror. 5 years ago, she had fled New York to escape the Lancasters' influence. Now she was back, fighting to save Grace's life, while Ethan's words echoed in her mind, "You're the only one I trust." The universe, it seemed, had a peculiar sense of irony. Chapter 7. The Art of Healing. The operating room hummed with focused energy as Masego Deja prepared to save Grace Lancaster's life. Every surface gleamed under harsh surgical lights, the sophisticated equipment she'd had flown in from Switzerland standing ready like silent sentinels. Her team moved with practiced precision, the choreography of preparation as familiar as breathing. BP holding steady, Dr. Chen reported from his position at the monitors. O2 sats at 98%. Masego nodded, her gloved hands hovering over Grace's exposed heart. The rare condition she'd identified required a modification of her groundbreaking technique, one she'd performed only twice before, both times in Switzerland. But this wasn't just another patient. This was Grace, beginning primary incision. Her voice carried the quiet authority that had made her famous in operating rooms across Europe. "Dr. Chen, prepare for bypass." Through the observation window, she knew Ethan was watching. He had refused to leave, standing vigil as she worked to save his mother's life. The weight of his presence should have been distracting, but instead it grounded her, reminded her of everything at stake. Hours ticked by as Masego navigated the intricate procedure. Her innovative approach required extraordinary precision. 1 millimeter's deviation could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. Sweat beaded beneath her surgical cap, but her hands remained perfectly steady. "Minor arrhythmia," one of the nurses called out. "Initiating sequence 4, Masego responded immediately. This was where her technique diverged from traditional methods. Instead of forcing the heart to adapt to standard procedures, her approach worked with the organ's natural rhythms, guiding rather than commanding. "Remarkable," Dr. Morrison murmured from his position observing. He had insisted on watching the groundbreaking surgery. Though Masego suspected his interest wasn't purely medical, the hospital board would want a full report on her techniques. Another hour passed in intense concentration. Masego's world narrowed to the beating heart beneath her hands, each suture a prayer, each movement a promise to the woman who had believed in her when no one else did. "Final bypass sequence complete," Dr. Chen announced. "Beginning transition." This was the most critical moment, allowing Grace's heart to resume its natural rhythm while maintaining the delicate repairs they'd made. Masego held her breath, watching the monitors. The first beat was weak, uncertain, the second stronger. By the third, the rhythm had stabilized into a strong, steady pulse. "Pressure normalizing," Chen reported, relief evident in his voice. All parameters within expected range. Masego released the breath she'd been holding. "Excellent work, everyone. Let's close." As her team began the final stages, she allowed herself a glance toward the observation window. Ethan still stood there, his forehead pressed against the glass, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. An hour later, changed out of her surgical scrubs and back in her tailored black pantsuit, Masego found him in the waiting room. He'd loosened his tie, his usually perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it. "She's stable," Masego said softly. "The procedure was successful." Ethan's eyes met hers, raw with emotion. "Thank you." His voice was rough. "I don't know what I would have done if—" "Don't." She held up a hand. "She's going to be fine. The modified technique worked perfectly, and her heart is already showing strong signs of adaptation." He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with coffee and worry. "Why did you do it? After everything, you could have sent another surgeon. You could have had her transferred to Switzerland. You know why." Masego's voice was barely a whisper. "Tell me anyway." She squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze directly. "Because she was the only one who saw me, really saw me, when I was your wife. Because when everyone else in your world treated me like an acquisition, she treated me like a daughter." Her voice caught slightly. "Because she gave me this." Her fingers touched the pearl pendant she still wore, Grace's gift on that last morning 5 years ago. Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes. "She never told me what happened that day, after you signed the papers. I came home and you were just gone. She gave me permission to leave." Masego moved to the window, watching dawn break over the Manhattan skyline. "Not just you, but everything I thought I needed to be. She told me sometimes we have to shatter completely to become who we're meant to be." "And have you?" His voice was closer now, just behind her. Become who you're meant to be. She turned to face him, startled by his proximity. I've become who I chose to be. There's a difference. Something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or understanding. The woman who just saved my mother's life. That's who you always were. I was just too blind to see it. Mr. Lancaster, Ethan. He stepped closer, his hand rising as if to touch her face before dropping back to his side. After what you just did, after everything, please, just Ethan. The moment stretched between them, charged with 5 years of unspoken words. Then a nurse appeared in the doorway. Doctor, Deja, Mrs. Lancaster is asking for you. The spell broke. Masego stepped back, professional mask sliding back into place. Of course. Mr. Lancaster, you should get some rest. Your mother will need you strong for her recovery. But as she walked away, she could feel his eyes following her, and something deep inside her chest ached with a pain no surgery could fix. Grace was awake but groggy when Masego entered her room. The sophisticated monitoring equipment showed strong vital signs, a testament to the success of the procedure. There's my miracle worker. Grace's voice was weak but warm. Come sit with me. Masego perched carefully on the edge of the bed, taking Grace's hand in hers. How are you feeling? Like I just had my heart rearranged by the most brilliant surgeon in the world. Grace's smile was tired but genuine, though I suspect you did more than just physical healing today. Grace! I saw him watching you. Grace squeezed her hand weakly. All those hours in surgery. He never left, you know, just stood there looking at you like a man seeing the sun for the first time after years of darkness. He was worried about you. Oh, darling. Grace's laugh turned into a small cough. He was worried about me 5 years ago too, when I had that minor procedure, but he didn't stand in the observation room for 8 hours then. Masego busied herself checking Grace's monitors, avoiding her knowing gaze. You need to rest. We can talk more when you're stronger. Masego. Grace's voice stopped her as she turned to leave. Do you know why I gave you that pearl? Because I was leaving. Because you wanted me to have something of the Lancaster family to take with me. No. Grace's eyes were clear, despite the post-surgical medication. I gave it to you because I knew you'd come back. Because true pearls, like true love, can only be formed under pressure. She settled back against her pillows. And sometimes the most precious things in life require a second chance to reach their full potential. Masego escaped to her office, Grace's words echoing in her mind. The space was temporary. Manhattan Memorial had insisted on providing her a private sanctuary during her stay, but someone had taken care to make it feel personal. Fresh flowers perfumed the air, and the view of the city stretched out before her like a glittering promise. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sophie. The institute called. They need you to sign off on the new research protocol. Work. Yes, work was safe. Work didn't come with complicated emotions and unresolved feelings. Work didn't look at her like she was the answer to questions he'd been asking for 5 years. But as she reached for the papers, another message appeared. Thank you isn't enough. Dinner? Just to talk. Masego stared at the words until they blurred. 5 years of carefully constructed walls trembled. She thought of Grace's words about pressure and pearls, about second chances and potential. Before she could change her mind, she typed, Le Bernardin. 8 p.m. Just dinner. His response was immediate. Just dinner. And maybe the truth, finally. She set the phone down with shaking hands. Outside her window, New York continued its eternal dance of light and shadow, unaware that in a hospital office high above its streets, a heart as complex as any she'd ever operated on was beginning to remember how to beat without fear. Chapter 8. Dangerous Territory. The morning after Grace's surgery dawned with unexpected complications. Masego had just settled into her temporary office at Manhattan Memorial when the alert came. Irregular heartbeat, dropping pressure, potential rejection of the repair. She moved through the hospital corridors like an avenging angel, her Louboutin heels clicking against polished floors, white coat flowing behind her. Medical staff scattered in her wake, recognizing the focused intensity that had made her famous across continents. Grace's room was already crowded with medical personnel when she arrived. Ethan stood in the corner, his usual commanding presence diminished by fear. Their eyes met briefly before Masego turned her attention to the monitors. "Talk to me," she demanded, reviewing the readings. Dr. Chen responded immediately. "Pressure dropped 20 minutes ago. We administered standard protocol, but no." Masego's fingers flew over the tablet, pulling up Grace's latest readings. "This isn't rejection. Look at the pattern." She enlarged the cardiac rhythm display. "The repair is holding. This is adaptation stress." Understanding dawned in Chen's eyes. Like the case in Geneva. Exactly. Masego was already adjusting medication levels. "Her heart is stronger than we anticipated. It's fighting the artificial constraints." A small smile touched her lips. Just like Grace, refusing to be told what to do. The next hour was intense, but controlled. Masego's modifications slowly brought Grace's readings back to normal, but with a subtle difference. A stronger, more natural rhythm than they'd initially programmed. "Remarkable," Dr. Morrison murmured, watching the monitors stabilize. The heart actually improved the repair on its own. "Not improved." Masego's voice held quiet pride. "Adapted. This is why my technique works. We guide the heart instead of forcing it. Sometimes healing means letting go of control." She felt Ethan's gaze on her, heavy with understanding that went beyond the medical. When she finally turned to face him, his eyes held a mix of gratitude and something deeper, more dangerous. "Another miracle, Doctor?" "Deja." His voice was rough with emotion. "No miracle." She kept her tone professional. "Just good medicine and a very stubborn patient." Grace chose that moment to wake, her eyes focusing first on Masego, then her son. "Are you two actually having a civil conversation? Perhaps I should have heart troubles more often." "Mother." Ethan moved to her bedside, taking her hand. "How do you feel?" "Like my heart is doing an interpretive dance." Grace's smile was weak but genuine. "Though considering who's conducting the performance, I'm not surprised." Masego busied herself checking vitals, trying to ignore the warmth in Grace's voice. "The adaptation process is normal. Your heart is exceptionally strong. It's making the repair its own. Just like you did with my surgical technique," she added softly, earning a knowing look from her former mother-in-law. "Speaking of technique," Dr. Morrison stepped forward. "The board is very interested in—" "Not now." Ethan's voice cut through the room like steel. "My mother needs rest, not business negotiations." Morrison retreated, but Masego caught his meaningful glance. The hospital would want answers soon, explanations for how she'd modified her technique, promises of training, guarantees of future cooperation. "Dr. Deja." Grace's voice drew her attention back. "Would you stay a moment? I'd like to discuss my recovery options." It was a transparent excuse, but everyone played along. The room cleared until only Masego, Grace, and Ethan remained. "Well," Grace settled against her pillows, "this feels familiar. Though last time we were all together, the circumstances were quite different." "Mother." Ethan's warning tone held no heat. "Oh, hush." Grace waved a hand weakly. "I've just had my heart rearranged. I'm allowed a few observations." She turned to Masego. "Like how my brilliant former daughter-in-law dropped everything to save my life, or how my son hasn't taken his eyes off her since she arrived." Masego felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Grace, you need to rest." I need honesty. Grace's voice strengthened. From both of you. Life is too short for pride and pretense. Look what it cost us last time. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. Masego studied the monitors, avoiding Ethan's gaze, but she could feel the weight of his presence behind her. I have other patients, she said finally, turning to leave. Masego. Grace caught her hand. Remember what I told you about the pearl, about pressure and potential? I remember everything you taught me. Masego squeezed her hand gently. Rest now. We'll talk more when you're stronger. She escaped into the hallway, but Ethan followed. We need to talk. About your mother's recovery. Of course. I'll have my team prepare. Stop! His hand caught her arm, turning her to face him. About us, about what really happened 5 years ago, about why you're still wearing my mother's pearl. The touch burned through her lab coat, igniting memories she'd thought long buried. There is no us, Mr. Lancaster. There's only a patient who needs care and a surgeon who can provide it. Is that why you came back? His voice dropped lower, intimate. Just professional duty. Why does it matter? She pulled away, but her skin tingled where he'd touched her. The past is past. We both moved on. Did we? He stepped closer, crowding her space with his presence. Because I've spent 5 years watching you revolutionize cardiac surgery, change lives, become everything you always dreamed of being. And all I could think was how blind I'd been, not to see it when I had the chance. Don't. The word came out more plea than command. We can't do this. Not now. Then when? His eyes searched hers. How long are we going to pretend that what's between us died with our marriage? Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. An emergency consultation needed in the cardiac unit. Professional crisis offered escape from personal complexity. I have to go. She stepped back, rebuilding her walls. Your mother needs rest, not emotional stress. We can discuss her recovery plan tomorrow. But as she walked away, Masego knew she was lying. To him, to herself, to the truth that beat in her chest as persistently as any heart she'd ever healed. Because some wounds couldn't be fixed with surgery, and some scars ran too deep for medicine to reach. The emergency turned out to be relatively minor, a post-operative patient showing typical signs of stress. Masego handled it efficiently, but her mind kept returning to the look in Ethan's eyes, the feel of his hand on her arm, the weight of 5 years' unspoken words. In her office later, she found a single red rose on her desk with a note. Some hearts take longer to heal than others. Dinner still stands. E. She touched the rose's velvet petals, remembering another garden, another time, when she'd believed love could bloom in any soil. Now she knew better, or thought she did. But as she watched the sun set over Manhattan, casting the city in shades of gold and shadow, Masego wondered if Grace was right. Perhaps some things, like pearls and hearts, needed pressure to reveal their true potential. Her phone lay on the desk, the dinner invitation still unanswered. Outside her window, New York continued its eternal dance, unaware that in a hospital office high above its streets, a woman who had mastered the art of healing hearts was finally confronting the one heart she'd never dared to treat, her own. Chapter 9. Walls Breaking. The private gardens of Manhattan Memorial Hospital offered an unexpected sanctuary in the heart of the city. Masego stood among the carefully tended roses, their perfume carrying memories of another garden, another life. 3 weeks had passed since Grace's surgery, and each day brought new complications, not all of them medical. I thought I'd find you here. Grace's voice, stronger now, carried across the morning air. She moved carefully along the garden path, her recovery progress evident in her steady steps. You should be resting. Masego turned, professional concern warring with affection. The physical therapy session was excellent, thanks to your program. Grace settled onto a marble bench, patting the space beside her. "Sit with me. We need to talk." Masego hesitated, then surrendered to the inevitable. Grace Lancaster had always possessed the ability to command without speaking, a trait her son had inherited. "Your recovery is progressing well," Masego began, but Grace cut her off with a wave. "Let's not pretend this is a medical consultation." Grace's eyes, sharp as ever, studied her face. "You've been avoiding him." There was no need to specify who him was. Ethan's presence had become a constant undercurrent in the hospital, his daily visits to his mother creating an intricate dance of timing and avoidance on Masego's part. "I've been focused on your recovery," Masego deflected. "The adaptation process requires careful monitoring." "Darling." Grace's voice softened. "You've performed this surgery countless times. The only thing you're monitoring with such dedication is your own heart." The truth of the words stung. These past weeks had been a masterclass in professional distance. Brief consultations, carefully timed rounds, always with other staff present. But each time she caught Ethan watching her work, each time their eyes met over medical charts or across crowded corridors, another brick in her carefully constructed walls crumbled. "He's different now," Grace continued gently. "The man who hurt you, who was too proud to see your worth, he's gone. This Ethan, the one who watches you like a man dying of thirst, he's the one who finally grew into the person I always knew he could be." "Grace," Masego's voice caught, "please don't." "Why not?" "Because it's easier to hold on to anger than risk hope. Because you've built such a perfect life that you're afraid to admit it might be missing something essential." Before Masego could respond, footsteps on the garden path announced company. Ethan appeared, his suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up in concession to the summer heat. He stopped short at the sight of them, and for a moment the garden held its breath. "Mother." He recovered first. "Dr. Chen said you'd finished physical therapy and decided a little fresh air would do me good." Grace's smile was innocent, but her eyes sparkled with mischief. "Though I'm feeling rather tired now. Masego, dear, would you mind if my son escorted me back to my room?" "I can call a nurse," Masego offered, but Grace was already rising. "Nonsense. Ethan can manage, and I'm sure you have other patients to attend to." She patted Masego's cheek affectionately. "Though remember what I said about monitoring the right things." They watched her make her way back inside, her steps slow but purposeful. In her wake, the garden seemed smaller, more intimate. "She's doing well," Ethan said finally, breaking the charged silence. "Thanks to you. She's doing well because she's Grace Lancaster, and she refuses to do anything else." Masego moved to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Have dinner with me." The words hung in the morning air, simple but weighted with complexity. She turned to face him, finding unexpected vulnerability in his expression. "Ethan, not as ex-spouses, not as doctor and patient's son, just dinner. Conversation. Truth." "Truth?" She laughed softly. "We've never been good at that." "Then let's learn." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Still the same after all these years. "One dinner. Le Bernardin. Tonight. I'll even promise to let you walk away again if that's what you truly want." The qualification caught her attention. "And if it's not what I want?" His eyes darkened. "Then we stop pretending these past 5 years have made us strangers instead of teaching us who we really are." A breeze stirred the roses, carrying their perfume between them like a memory of simpler times. Masego thought of Grace's words about monitoring the right things, about the difference between walls and wisdom. 8 o'clock, she said finally. "And Ethan?" She met his gaze directly. "I'm not the same woman you knew." "I know." His smile held a hint of pride. That's exactly why I'm asking. The rest of the day passed in a blur of consultations and procedures, but beneath her professional facade, Masego's mind kept returning to the garden, to the look in Ethan's eyes when she'd agreed to dinner. It was the same look he'd worn watching her perform Grace's surgery, a mixture of awe and regret, pride and longing. At 7:30, she stood in her hotel suite, studying her reflection. The woman who gazed back bore little resemblance to the shy doctor who had once tried so hard to please the Lancaster family. This woman wore confidence like armor, success like a crown. The black Valentino dress skimmed her curves with elegant suggestion, while Grace's pearl gleamed at her throat, a reminder of who she had been and who she had become. Le Bernardin's private dining room offered discreet luxury and absolute privacy. Ethan was already waiting, his bespoke suit a dark complement to her dress. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, measuring the changes time had wrought. "You're wearing the pearl," he said softly. "I always wear it." She settled into her chair, accepting the wine he poured. "It reminds me of the day I chose myself. The day you left." He sat across from her, his eyes never leaving her face. "I came home to find you gone, only your ring on the dresser, and my mother looking at me like I'd failed some essential test of humanity." "Hadn't you?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. "Yes." His admission surprised her. "I failed you, the marriage, myself, but mostly I failed to see what was right in front of me." "And what was that?" "A woman who saw past the Lancaster name to the man I could be, who dreamed bigger than society galas and board meetings, who wanted to change lives while I was focused on changing profit margins." He took a slow breath. "A woman who loved me enough to leave when I couldn't love her the way she deserved." The honesty in his voice shook her more than any grand gesture could have. "Why are we really here, Ethan?" "Because watching you save my mother's life made me realize something." He leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "You've become everything you dreamed of being, brilliant, powerful, respected, and I've spent 5 years becoming someone worthy of standing beside you." "You think you have?" She arched an eyebrow, but her heart thundered against her ribs. "No." His smile was self-deprecating. "But I'd like the chance to try." The waiter's arrival provided a moment to gather her thoughts. They ordered with the ease of people accustomed to fine dining, but beneath the sophisticated surface, emotions swirled like storm clouds. "Tell me about Switzerland," he said as their first course arrived. "About building your technique, your reputation." So she did. She told him about the long hours, the failed attempts, the breakthrough that changed everything. He listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions that revealed how closely he'd followed her career. "Your turn," she said finally. "Tell me about these 5 years of personal growth." "I started a children's medical foundation." His answer surprised her. "Using the Lancaster Group's resources to fund innovative treatments for families who can't afford them." "I didn't know that. You weren't supposed to." He smiled slightly. "It wasn't about impressing you. It was about becoming someone who could look in the mirror and be proud of what he saw." The conversation flowed easily after that, touching on their separate lives, their shared past, the changes time had brought. By dessert, Masego felt something shifting inside her chest, a wall crumbling, or perhaps a heart remembering how to hope. "Dance with me," he said suddenly. "There's no music." He pulled out his phone, and soft jazz filled the private room. "There's always music if you know where to look." She shouldn't accept. Dancing meant touching, meant closeness, meant danger. But when he held out his hand, she found herself rising, letting him draw her into his arms. They moved together with the same chemistry that had marked their first dance, but this time experience added depth to desire, wisdom to want. His hand on her waist was warm through the silk of her dress. while hers rested against his chest, feeling his heartbeat, strong and steady like the man he'd become. "I miss you," he whispered against her hair. "Not the woman I was too blind to appreciate. This you, brilliant, powerful, impossible to ignore. I miss you even though I've never really known you." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes, finding raw honesty in their depths. "Ethan, let me earn you." His voice was rough with emotion. "Not the society wife I thought I wanted. Not the quiet doctor I tried to contain. You, exactly as you are now. Let me prove I've become someone worthy of standing beside the queen you've made yourself." The words trembled between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying. Masego thought of Grace in the garden, talking about monitoring the right things, about walls and wisdom, protection and prison. "I can't promise anything," she said finally. "I'm not asking for promises." His thumb brushed her cheek. "Just possibility." Outside the restaurant's windows, New York glittered like scattered stars, while inside, two people who had lost everything found themselves standing on the edge of something new. Something built not on society's expectations or family obligations, but on the foundation of who they had become when they were forced to grow apart. And in the space between them, hope bloomed like roses in an unexpected garden. Chapter 10. The Truth Emerges. The autumn sun painted Manhattan Memorial's executive boardroom in shades of amber and gold. Masego stood at the window, watching leaves dance across the courtyard below, while behind her the hospital board debated the future of her children's cardiac program. 5 weeks had passed since Grace's surgery, each day bringing new complications and new revelations. "Dr. Deja." Victoria Reed's voice cut through the murmur of discussion. "Perhaps you'd care to explain why you rejected our partnership offer." Masego turned slowly, taking in the scene before her. Victoria sat among the board members like a spider in her web, elegant in blood-red Chanel. The irony wasn't lost on Masego. The woman who had once tried to take her place now sought to claim her professional territory as well. "The techniques aren't for sale," Masego replied evenly. "As I've explained repeatedly, they're meant to save lives, not generate profits." "How noble." Victoria's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Though I heard your Swiss Institute charges quite impressive fees for private patients, which subsidize treatment for those who can't afford it." Masego moved to the table, her Louboutins clicking against marble floors. "A concept you seemed unfamiliar with during your brief tenure on this board." Before Victoria could respond, the boardroom doors opened. Ethan Lancaster strode in, commanding attention without effort. His eyes met Masego's briefly before he addressed the room. "I apologize for interrupting, but this meeting is unnecessary." He placed a folder on the table. "The Lancaster Foundation has already signed an agreement with Dr. Deja's institute. Full funding for the children's cardiac program, with no strings attached." Victoria's composure cracked. "You can't do that. The pharmaceutical contract has been terminated." Ethan's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Your company's testing protocols didn't meet our ethical standards." The revelation hung in the air like thunder before lightning. Masego felt pieces clicking into place. Victoria's desperate pursuit of the partnership, her attempts to undermine the children's program, her presence at the charity gala where Grace collapsed. "If you'll excuse us," Ethan continued smoothly, "Dr. Deja and I have details to discuss." The board filed out, Victoria's heels striking the floor like angry punctuation marks. When the doors closed, Masego turned to Ethan. "What testing protocols?" He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of discomfort. "Victoria's company has been cutting corners, rushing trials to market. When I discovered it..." He met her eyes directly. "That's why I called off the wedding." The admission stunned her. "You never married her?" I couldn't. His laugh held no humor. She represented everything I was trying to change about myself, the pursuit of profit over people, appearance over substance. He moved closer. She reminded me of who I used to be when I lost you. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Before Masego could respond, her phone buzzed, Grace requesting her presence. They found Grace in the hospital's solarium, surrounded by flowers and afternoon light. She looked up from a thick file with a knowing smile. "I see you finally learned the truth about Victoria," she said by way of greeting, "though you missed the most interesting part." "Mother," Ethan's warning tone held no heat. "Oh, hush." Grace waved the file. "Masego deserves to know why her father's mining company suddenly stabilized 5 years ago, after months of hostile takeover attempts." Masego's breath caught. "What?" "Show her, Ethan." Grace's voice was gentle but firm. "Show her what you've been protecting her from all these years." With reluctant grace, Ethan took the file from his mother. Victoria's company wasn't just after hospital contracts. They were targeting vulnerable businesses, including your father's. When I discovered their methods, he handed Masego the documents. I used the Lancaster Group's resources to block them, quietly, anonymously. Masego's hands trembled as she read. Page after page of financial maneuvers, legal interventions, careful protections put in place to shield her family's interests, all dated within months of their divorce. "Why?" The word came out, barely above a whisper. "Because I couldn't protect your heart," he said softly, "but I could protect your legacy." Grace cleared her throat delicately. "I'll just go check on my physical therapy schedule." She rose with careful dignity. "Take your time. Some truths need space to breathe." When they were alone, Masego faced Ethan fully. "All these years, I thought that I didn't care, that I was too proud to see your worth." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne. "I was proud, yes, and blind, and foolish. But watching you walk away..." His voice roughened. "It woke something in me, made me see how far I'd fallen from the man I wanted to be. So you protected my father's company, and started the Children's Medical Foundation, and reformed the Lancaster Group's investment strategies." His smile held self-deprecation. "Trying to become someone worthy of the woman you'd become, even if I never saw you again." Masego moved to the window, needing space to process. The autumn sun painted the city in warm light, while below, life continued its eternal dance. "When did you know?" she asked finally. "About Victoria's company?" 2 days before the wedding." His reflection appeared beside hers in the glass. "I found irregularities in their testing data, shortcuts that put children at risk. When I confronted her..." He shook his head. "She laughed, said profits matter more than perfection. And you ended it." "How could I not?" His voice dropped lower. "I'd already lost one woman who valued lives over ledgers. I couldn't compound that mistake." The truth of the past 5 years settled around them like autumn leaves, beautiful in their revelation, bittersweet in their timing. Masego thought of all the moments that had led them here, her flight to Switzerland, his quiet protection, their separate journeys toward becoming who they were meant to be. "I'm still not that woman," she said finally. "The one who planted roses and dreamed of changing lives from within your world." "I know." He turned her gently to face him. "You're so much more. You're the woman who revolutionized cardiac surgery, who saves lives on her own terms, who commands respect instead of asking permission." His thumb brushed her cheek. "You're everything I was too blind to see you becoming." "And you?" She allowed herself to really look at him, the new lines around his eyes, the silver threading his temples, the wisdom that had replaced arrogance. Who have you become? Someone who finally understands that true strength isn't in controlling others, but in helping them soar. His eyes held hers. Someone who spent 5 years learning to be worthy of a second chance, even if I didn't deserve one. The space between them crackled with possibility. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the room in shades of gold and shadow. In the distance, a piano began to play, probably from the children's ward, where music therapy was part of recovery. "Dance with me," he said softly. "Here? Now? Why not?" His smile held memories of another dance, another time. We've always been best at truth when we're in motion. She shouldn't accept. There were meetings to attend, patience to check, professional boundaries to maintain. But when he held out his hand, she found herself taking it, letting him draw her into the gentle sway of an unheard melody. "I've missed this," he murmured against her hair. "Not the society wife I lost, but the partner I never deserved. The brilliant, fierce woman who saw possibility where I saw only profit." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes, finding raw honesty in their depths. "Ethan, let me prove it." His voice roughened with emotion. "Not with grand gestures or business deals. Let me show you who I've become, day by day, choice by choice." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying. Masego thought of Grace's knowing smile, of hidden protections and quiet growth, of separate paths leading to this moment of truth. "I can't go backwards," she said finally. "I'm not asking you to." His hand tightened on hers. "I'm asking for the chance to go forward, together, this time, as equals." Outside the windows, New York prepared for evening, while inside, two people who had lost everything found themselves standing on the edge of something new. Something built not on society's expectations or family obligations, but on the foundation of who they had become when they were forced to grow apart. And in the space between them, truth bloomed like roses in an autumn garden, promising not a return to what was lost, but a beginning of something far more precious, a love born of wisdom, strength, and the courage to try again. Chapter 11. Hearts on Fire. The private office suite at Manhattan Memorial gleamed in the glow of midnight. Masego sat at her desk, surrounded by patient files and research papers, but her mind kept drifting to the revelations of the past week. The truth about Victoria, about Ethan's protection of her father's company, about the man he had become in her absence. It all swirled in her thoughts like autumn leaves in a storm. A soft knock interrupted her reverie. She looked up to find Ethan in her doorway, his tie loosened, jacket discarded. He looked as exhausted as she felt. "You're working late," he observed, moving into the room with that quiet grace that had always been uniquely his. "Emergency consultation from Geneva." She gestured to her tablet. "A case similar to your mother's. And that couldn't wait until morning." His smile held gentle challenge. "Or are you avoiding something? Someone?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. 5 years ago, Ethan Lancaster had been a master of indirect communication, of subtle manipulations, wrapped in social graces. This new version, honest, straightforward, unafraid of emotional complexity, still surprised her. "I'm not avoiding anything," she said finally. "I'm processing." "Then process with me." He settled into the chair across from her desk. "Ask me anything. After 5 years of silence, don't we owe each other that much?" The invitation hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Masego studied him in the soft light, the new lines around his eyes that spoke of hard-earned wisdom, the slight silver at his temples that somehow made him more devastating than ever. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked finally. "About protecting my father's company, about Victoria's true nature, about any of it. Would you have believed me?" His question held no bitterness, only honest inquiry. The man I was then, proud, controlling, more concerned with appearance than substance, would you have trusted my motives? No, she admitted softly. I wouldn't have. Exactly. He leaned forward, his eyes intense in the dim light. I had to become someone different, someone worthy of the truth, of you. And have you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. I don't know. His honesty was disarming. But I know I'm no longer the man who let you walk away, who was too blind to see that the quiet doctor he married was becoming a queen in her own right. The words stirred something deep in her chest, a longing she'd thought safely buried under years of professional accomplishment and personal growth. Why the Children's Medical Foundation? She asked, changing the subject slightly. Of all the ways to rebuild yourself? A soft smile touched his lips. Because every time I saw a child in need of care they couldn't afford, I remembered your passion for the cardiac wing, your vision of medicine that served everyone, not just those who could pay for it. He met her eyes directly. I couldn't give you your dreams then, but I could honor them in your absence. Masego rose, needing movement to process the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She moved to the window, watching the city lights twinkle like earthbound stars. Do you know what hurts the most? She said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Not the betrayal, not even the divorce. It's the realization that we both had to lose everything to become who we were meant to be. She felt him move behind her, close enough that his presence warmed her skin through her silk blouse. Did we lose everything? His voice was rough with emotion. Or did we just take different paths to the same destination? She turned to face him, finding herself caught in the intensity of his gaze. And what destination is that? This moment. His hand rose to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin with exquisite gentleness. Here. Now, with both of us finally strong enough to handle what's between us. Ethan. His name was half warning, half plea. Tell me you don't feel it. His other hand found her waist, drawing her closer. This connection that's only grown stronger with time and distance. Tell me you don't lie awake wondering what could have been, what could still be. She should step away, should maintain professional distance, should protect herself from the vulnerability shining in his eyes. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch. I've built an empire, she whispered. Changed lives. Become someone I'm proud to be. I know. Pride and admiration colored his voice. That's exactly why I'm here. Not to reclaim what was, but to discover what could be with the woman you've become. The space between them crackled with possibility. Outside, the city hummed its eternal lullaby, while inside, two hearts that had been carefully guarded for 5 years began to remember the rhythm of hope. Kiss me, she said suddenly, surprising them both. Not like you used to, controlled, proper, society-appropriate. Kiss me like the man you've become, kissing the woman I am now. For a heartbeat, he simply looked at her, as if memorizing every detail of this moment. Then his lips found hers, and the world tilted on its axis. This wasn't the practiced passion of their marriage, the carefully choreographed affection of a society couple. This was raw, real, electric, the kiss of two people who had lost everything and found themselves stronger in the breaking. His hands tangled in her hair, while hers gripped his shoulders, 5 years of distance dissolving in the heat between them. He tasted of coffee and possibility, of regret transformed into wisdom, of love that had matured like fine wine. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, the world had shifted somehow. The office seemed smaller, more intimate, charged with new potential. Well, he managed, his voice unsteady, that was different. She supplied the word, her fingers still curled in his shirt. Everything's different now. Not everything. His forehead rested against hers. The way I feel about you, that's only grown stronger, deeper, more real. Because we're real now. The realization dawned as she spoke it. Not the society wife and controlling husband, not the quiet doctor and powerful businessman, just us, finally. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes, his hands still framing her face. Marry me again. The words hung in the midnight air, unexpected and inevitable all at once. Ethan, not now, not tomorrow, not until we've rebuilt everything that broke between us. His thumbs traced her cheekbones. But someday, when we're ready, marry me again, not as Ethan Lancaster's wife, but as my equal, my partner, my queen. Tears pricked behind her eyes, but these weren't the bitter tears of 5 years ago. These were tears of possibility, of hope rekindled, of love that had survived the forge of separation and emerged stronger. Ask me again, she whispered, when we've proven this is real, when we've built something new from the ashes of what was. Every day, he promised, pulling her close again. I'll prove it every day until you believe in us as much as I do. And there in her office, with the city lights twinkling like witnesses and their hearts beating in newfound synchrony, Masego and Ethan began writing a new chapter, one where love wasn't about possession or appearance, but about growth and strength and the courage to try again. This time, they would build something unbreakable. This time, they would get it right. Chapter 12, Phoenix Rising 1 year later. The new Deja Lancaster Children's Cardiac Center gleamed in the morning sun, its modern architecture a testament to the marriage of innovation and compassion. Masego stood in what would be the main surgical suite, surrounded by state-of-the-art equipment that would help save countless young lives. Admiring your kingdom. Grace's voice carried warmth and pride as she entered, moving with the easy grace of someone fully recovered. The past year had seen her not just survive, but thrive, becoming an active advocate for cardiac health awareness. Our kingdom, Masego corrected, turning to embrace her. None of this would exist without you. Oh, I just had the good sense to have heart trouble at exactly the right moment. Grace's eyes twinkled with mischief. Though I must say, my timing was impeccable. They shared a knowing smile, both remembering the chain of events that had brought them here. Grace's crisis had done more than reunite Masego and Ethan. It had catalyzed a complete transformation of cardiac care in New York. The first patients arrive next week, Masego said, running her hand along the pristine surgical table. Children who would never have had access to this level of care otherwise. Thanks to your techniques and my son's resources. Grace moved to stand beside her. Speaking of my son. Mother. Ethan's voice cut in smoothly as he joined them. Are you matchmaking again? Because I believe that ship has already sailed. He crossed to Masego, dropping a kiss on her temple with the easy affection they'd developed over the past year. Their relationship had grown slowly, deliberately, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose, rather than society's expectations. I'm simply admiring how well you two work together, Grace defended. The way you've combined Masego's medical brilliance with the Lancaster resources. It's exactly what I always hoped for. No, it's better. Ethan's arm slipped around Masego's waist. Because this time we built it as equals. The past year had proved that truth. Every decision about the center had been made jointly, from the innovative design that prioritized patient comfort to the scholarship program for promising medical students from disadvantaged backgrounds. The board meeting starts in 20 minutes, Masego reminded them, though she made no move to leave the comfort of Ethan's embrace. We need to finalize the operational protocols. Already done. He produced a tablet showing her the updated documents. I had our legal team incorporate all your suggestions about accessibility and financial aid. She scanned the changes, noting how perfectly he'd merged her medical ideals with practical business considerations. This was the man she'd fallen in love with all over again, someone who used his power to enable dreams rather than control them. Perfect, she murmured, then caught Grace's knowing smile. Oh, stop looking so pleased with yourself. I'm a mother who gets to see her children happy. Grace spread her hands innocently. Both my son and the daughter of my heart, working together to save lives. How could I not be pleased? Before either could respond, Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway. Doctor? Deja? The surgical team from Geneva has arrived for the training orientation. Go. Ethan squeezed her hand. Lead your revolution. I'll handle the board. She kissed him quickly, still marveling at how natural such gestures had become. Dinner tonight? That little Italian place? The one where you finally agreed to give us another chance? His smile held memories of that evening 6 months ago. Wouldn't miss it. The day passed in a whirlwind of activity. Training sessions with her Swiss team, meetings with hospital administrators, consultations with architects about the final touches to the center. Through it all, Masego felt a deep sense of rightness, of pieces falling into perfect alignment. Evening found her in her office, reviewing patient files for the center's opening week. A knock at her door revealed Ethan, looking devastatingly handsome in his perfectly tailored suit. Ready for dinner? He paused, taking in her focused expression. Or do you need more time with the files? No, I'm ready. She stood, gathering her things. Just making sure everything's perfect for next week. It will be. He helped her into her coat, his hands lingering on her shoulders. Because you've thought of everything, planned for every contingency, considered every possibility. We have, she corrected softly. We did this together. His eyes darkened with emotion. Yes, we did. And speaking of doing things together, he reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. Masego's breath caught. Ethan, before you say anything, this isn't what you think. He opened the box to reveal not a ring, but a key. It's to our new home, if you want it. She lifted the key, noting the address engraved on it. The brownstone near the center, with a garden in the back. His voice softened. Room for roses, if you're still interested in growing things. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. Their first marriage had started in his mansion, surrounded by his world. This time, he was offering to build something new, together. The roses were never about gardening, she said quietly. They were about creating beauty in small spaces, about believing something could grow in seemingly barren soil. I know. He took her hands in his. That's why this time we'll plant them together. Create something beautiful from the ground up. She looked at the key again, remembering another garden, another time. But this wasn't about recreating the past. It was about building a future. Yes, she said simply. His smile was brilliant. Yes to the house, or yes to everything. Yes to possibility. She stepped closer, her free hand rising to cup his cheek. Yes to building something new. Yes to Dot. She paused, heart racing. Yes to becoming Mrs. Deja Lancaster when we're ready. The kiss he gave her then was everything their first marriage hadn't been. Passionate but tender, powerful but giving, a promise of partnership rather than possession. When they finally parted, the city lights twinkled beyond her office windows like stars bearing witness to their new beginning. Shall we go to dinner? He asked, offering his arm with a smile that held both memory and promise. Lead the way, Mr. Deja Lancaster. His laugh was rich with joy as they left the office together, steps perfectly in sync. Behind them, the center stood ready to begin its mission of healing hearts. Before them stretched a future they would build together, brick by brick, dream by dream. And somewhere in a garden yet to be planted, roses waited to bloom, not as a symbol of what was lost, but as a testament to what could grow when love was given room to flourish in its own time, in its own way. The end.